Everyone basically has an equal chance at a voice or at going viral these days, however true or otherwise their information is.
While federal government is obviously important and has an impact on everybody's lives, your state and local government are really, the ones that are impacting your day-to-day life. We tend to feel like we're divided, but if we can get together and communicate about what's happening in our community, and understanding with this data and this information, we could probably bridge some divides that
Yeah.
that exist today.
You're listening to the Transformed with Data podcast with Graeme Crawford, CEO of Crawford Macmillan. Graeme is here to share something he's genuinely passionate about. He's going to show you how data can completely change the outcome for both people and businesses. In each episode, he sits down with real people who've done incredible things with data. But don't worry, these aren't your typical dry case studies. Graeme and his guests bring you stories about leaders and innovators who saw something in their data that sparked a brand new reality. These are changes that tore through entire industries, upended company cultures, and sometimes even changed lives. So whether you're a data enthusiast or just curious about how to find the truth in your data, join Graeme as he discovers how data becomes more than just numbers. It becomes the spark that ignites real, meaningful change. Let's get started. Thanks for listening.
What good is transparency if no one can understand it? Chris Piper has spent his career turning raw political data into something rare: public trust. As the former Commissioner of Elections for Virginia and now Executive Director of Virginia's Public Access Project, Chris has seen both sides of the democratic equation, from safeguarding the data within government to making it accessible and understandable to the people it serves. At VPAP, he leads the effort to decipher the complexity of campaign finance, election results, and legislative activity, transforming thousands of PDFs and public records into actionable insights for everyday citizens. In this episode, we'll cover how design and accessibility shape civic engagement, why open data isn't enough, and what it takes to make the government accountable in the age of information overload. This one's about the architecture of trust and the role that data plays in strengthening or eroding our democracy. Here's Chris Piper. Welcome.
Hey, Graham, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very good. Thanks so much for coming on. We've known each other for a while, and really wanted to get you on here to talk about this amazing data that you look after, and things that you do. Can you? I gave a brief background on the Virginia Public Access Project. Can you expand on that a little more for folks who, unlike me, might not be as familiar with the work of the organization?
Sure. About 28 years ago now, the campaign finance reports for state and local candidates in Virginia were filed on paper. And so, the thing about Virginia that's really critical to understand is to this day, we don't have contribution limits. So if you want to give $1 billion to a candidate for office, you can. In fact, just yesterday, Lieutenant Governor candidate got $1 million and the Attorney General candidate got $1 million. So think about it. This is 1996, 97, and people are funding campaigns, but if it's filed on paper, it was stuck in a filing cabinet somewhere in Richmond and pretty inaccessible. The five major newspapers, if you remember what they are, they they got together and they said, well, why don't we just take all that data that's in there, have somebody kind of put it into a database so we can search on it. And so our founder and executive director, up until 2 years ago, was a reporter, and he took that on and started entering all these campaign finance reports into a database, and eventually put it on this newfangled thing they called the internet.
Well, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so from that was born the Virginia Public Access Project. And the unique thing that we were doing way back then was we were assigning, IDs to each donor. So, you are Graeme Crawford. It's an interesting spelling of the name. We know that there's other ways to spell that name.
Yeah.
You used to work for one company, you used to live in one house. And what's cool about our data is that we, over the last 28 years, have developed some significant processes to figure out that whether they spell it Graham with an H or Graham with an E in your case, we know that's the same Graham, right? And we can tie all that together. And that's really important because if you've given to 20 different candidates, we want to be able to see all 20 of those candidates. That was the Virginia Public Access Project. And then about 2011, a man named Tom Whipple, who had been getting up for about 12, 13, 14 years to pull together the day's Virginia political and governmental news and put it into an email and email it out to everybody that
Right.
wanted to. He was ready to move on from doing that, and he turned over that process to Virginia Public Access Project. So since 2011, Virginia Public Access Project is Monday through Friday been delivering, compiling and delivering the day's news on Virginia politics and government, and that's called VA News. And we send it out every morning to about 22,000 people. It's absolutely free. And then along 2013, we started gathering all this data that we have and data from around different
Yep.
areas of the government and putting together these visuals that help explain what is happening in this data. And so, long story short, we not only do campaign finance, but we do the day's news. We do visualizations to explain complex information, take data that's complex and distill it down so it's easy to understand. And we also get lobbyist data and conflict of interest reports from candidates and legislators. And we also report on election results. And we also, every General Assembly session, have an easy to search, bill profile. So if you want to understand a little bit more about the General Assembly and what's happening there, we make that pretty easy. Now we've got a podcast ourselves, and we also have a mobile app. So when you're down at the General Assembly, it's easy to get around and figure out where your legislators are and where meetings are, et cetera. So
I
kind of a
love
fun job.
it's really kind of throwing the doors open to democracy in a time where, and you mentioned the main newspapers yourself, but for various reasons, and because of the how easy it has become for people to proliferate information onto the internet, true or otherwise, regardless of whatever source they're from, like everyone basically has an equal chance at a voice or at going viral these days, however true or otherwise their information is. The importance of what you're providing here, of factual, objective, non-partisan information, really strikes me as something critical. So glad for the 22,000 people on the list, but I'm guessing, like from VPAP's perspective, I think observing the world around you, I guess you would wish more people would know about this and more people would use it than currently do.
Yeah, 100%. And part of, since I've been on the last 2 years, me and the board and the team have been working to figure out how can we bring this to the masses, and make it accessible. For a long time, it's been political insiders. It's been folks that are, lobbyists. They're, candidates and people who work for legislators and on campaigns, and it's very useful and helpful to them.
I'm sure,
But
yeah.
to your average, yeah, to your average citizen, I mean, there's interesting information, but we have been really working to make our website simpler, easier to use. We're looking at more and more data that's not just about campaign finance. And, last year we had, and I'll talk about this in a second, but we had what we called Education Shark Week. So, like the first week of school that kids were going back to college, they were going back to you know, public school. We did a whole bunch of data on the state of education in Virginia. And what's really critical about that is that, just real quick, we're a fiercely nonpartisan organization. We don't lean one
Hmm.
way or the other. So when we put this data out, we don't, we provide enough context so you know what you're looking at, but we're not trying to swing you to say that, well, this means this and this means that. It's really for you to make that decision and how it aligns best with your values. So, one of the things that we did is last September, we launched what we call Civic's Navigator, and it is a civic education program. It's not just for K-12, it's for higher ed, it's for adults, to bring to life Virginia state and local politics and government and to make it more accessible. We really do, think that while federal government is obviously important and has an impact on everybody's lives, your state and local government are really, the ones that are impacting your day-to-day life. I promise you that, Congress and President Trump are not going to go out and fix, that pothole out in front of your house, and they're not going to make traffic better. That's not their role. So, when we make Virginia state and local politics and government accessible, what we've found is when people utilize this information, they can go to their representatives, they can go armed and informed with information. to help make their case to their representatives. And honestly, data and all that information in your hands really does help you to impact your community, your state, in a way that you can't necessarily impact at the federal level. So really, we believe that data, the pen is mightier than the sword, for sure. But that pen needs to be backed up with data and information so that you can really impact the decisions of the legislators and other representatives.
There are so many threads that I want to pull from that. First, a really important qualitative piece of data that I talk about whenever I get the opportunity, and that's what you mentioned, right? 2 and a bit years ago, Chris, I was doing my US citizenship test, and I studied very hard. There's 100 possible questions, and you get 10, and you need to score 60%. I was most disappointed when I got the first 6 right, and then they just stopped the test. I didn't get the chance to showboat the last
Ah.
4. But one of the things in there covered in the citizenship exam that I think maybe the country could do with some reminding on is what issues are dealt with at a state and local level and what issues are dealt with at a federal level. And you're right, school, education, policing, transportation, all those things that are critical to people's everyday lives, that actually they're members of Congress and the senators can't do much about. And the thing so I've often encouraged people in my sphere to say, hey, actually, state and local politics is far more impactful than you think. And what surprised me when I practiced what I preached is just how accessible those local elected officials are. Like, I've been lucky enough to have a number of great conversations with my state delegate, with my state senator as well. They're always available at local events that happen in your community. They always show up to those, and it's a real way to have influence in the type of issues that affect your day-to-day life. So that's something that I wanted to make a plug for. State and local is often overlooked as a way to have impact, and not only have impact, but in a time when people feel so far separated from Capitol Hill, even those of us who live quite close to it. It's a way to take back a bit of control over a world that it's very easy to feel like you have no control over.
With the decline of kind of the local media ecosystem that was so prevalent for so much of our history, we can feel so disconnected from the folks that we live right next to, and these issues that divide us. When you look at the state and local level, you'll actually find that there's a lot of things that we can all get behind, and we can all come together and support. I mean, you look at state and local government right now, and the issue of data centers. Data centers is not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's just an issue if you look at it and you understand some of the complexity about it. There's a lot of things that we can all get behind. One of the visualizations we love to do every single year is following the General Assembly session. We take a look at all of the votes that were taken on the floor of the General Assembly, both the House and the State Senate. And last year was a little over 75%. The year before was over 80%. What I mean by that is all of the votes that came to the floor, they agreed unanimously
Wow.
on those votes, right? And so, we think that our party or our country is so divided and that our parties can't get along. But here in Virginia, 80% of the votes taken, they all agree on. The remaining votes that are out there are unanimous, or sorry, are close votes. They're not always party line votes. Of the party line votes, I think of that 20%, if I remember correctly, it was something like, a good 15% of them were party line votes. But when you think about that, it's really impactful to understand that there's a lot more that unites us than divides us. And when we focus on just the issues at the federal level, I think that we tend to feel like we're divided. But if we can get together and communicate about what's happening in our community, and understanding with this data and this information, we could probably bridge some divides that
Yeah.
that exist today.
And all of that happening in a state, and I won't quote the data because I've no doubt you know it a lot better than I do. But in a state that is, not when the big show comes into town, not classified officially as a swing state, but there's certainly a purple tinge to Virginia, and at the state level, control of the House and the Senate and the governor's office seems to be very much in the balance. So
Hmm.
in many ways, that's the recipe for that party line approach that you get on Capitol Hill. So that data you shared about 84% of unanimous bills passing becomes even more impressive than it would be in a state, for example, that was, majority controlled by one party or the other.
Right. Exactly.
The context is everything. I want to share an experience that I had earlier this year when I was digging into for fun, because this is what I do for fun, Chris. Digging into some open data, and I'll use my air quotes for those that are listening. Open data, because it didn't feel that open, and the data I was looking at was actually, and here I am, like, not fully remembering exactly where I got it from, but I think it was from the state of Virginia rather than from VPAP. But it was data about causes of death in Virginia, and I was looking just as a fun little data analysis project in my spare time, because that's how I like to have fun. Two things struck me. One, like, why default to everything being in a PDF, which is just, to do any sort of analysis, a complete nightmare to work with. And then, I wanted to look at trends, so I pulled the data for, I think, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and then for each year there were slightly different columns, and not all the columns were complete, and not all the rows were complete for every column. And actually, as is always the case with most data analysis, for those who don't do it for fun, 98% of the work was cleaning the data and getting into a state where I could do the analysis before I actually did the analysis. But is that like, there's a cynic somewhere buried inside me, Chris, that said, "Oh, the government." I've seen the federal government do this, with their open data as well. Like, they put it out in a format that feels to me almost, dare I accuse them of being doing this deliberately unusable.
Yeah, I don't know if it's deliberately unusable, but I can say that we run into a lot of issues when we're trying to get data from different sources for the same reasons that you provided. The data's inconsistent. It's frustrating to say the least. But that said, I think more and more, I mean, one thing you've got in Virginia is the Virginia Open Data Portal. Back in the late 20 teens, General Assembly passed a law requiring that Virginia employ a chief data officer to kind of pull all this stuff together. And that is helping to kind of bridge that gap. But there's a few challenges that I would just bring up. Perhaps there's some deliberate, we don't really want this to be too accessible because but there's more than likely. In Virginia, we have a new governor every 4 years. So you basically have new heads of agencies every 4 years, and they have different priorities, and they have different, things that they're looking at. And then you have turnover at the lowest ranks, and all through the agencies. And so you're going to find that kind of inconsistency. The other thing is, the nature of state government, I think, even local government is under-resourced.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, so you're lucky that they're capturing the data in the first place, even if it is on PDF. So I think, one of the things that I think is important is you know, yes, you should be out there having fun with this data, grabbing that data, because I can speak from experience. When I was at the Department of Elections here in Virginia, if somebody called up and said, "Hey, I can't find this data. How can I get this data?" I said, "Oh, well, we might be able to pull that data. We might collect that data, but we're not putting it out anywhere." And it becomes something like that might be really important because obviously somebody's interested in it. And I can't tell you how many times that we started to do that. And I think it's critical. This is why I think that engaging with your state and local government is so important, because we don't know what we don't know, and so we rely on citizenry to come in and ask questions and ask for information. And Nine times out of 10, that's what we want to do. We want to be able to provide that information and provide assurances that the work that we're doing is being done. It's being done capably, et cetera. So anyway, I think it's great that you're, spending some time digging into that stuff because it's really critical information, and hopefully the government can respond and get that information to you.
I'll share my Looker dashboard with you afterwards. So we can note out together. We can note out together over it. There's something else you said about earlier. I wanted to come back to about you want to provide objective data, without any lean to it, without any without being overanalyzed or overprocessed to the point that it feels like you're trying to draw people towards a certain conclusion, which is great for the objective users and making open data truly available for folks. But you also mentioned that some of your biggest consumers or your most excited consumers are lobbyists who typically will be seeking to do the opposite of like paint the picture one way or another, depending on what legislation or candidate or whatever it is that they are trying to support. So how do you strike the balance between over processing it towards a conclusion, while still making it available and access? Like it feels like a bit of a knife edge.
I will say when we put out, so the data is the data, I mean, we when it comes to campaign finance data, it's out there, and our real task there is just making it accessible, easy to find, easy to search. And however you want to use that data, I mean, we hope that it's used for good.
Yeah, of course.
But the data's got to be out there so that people can make decisions. The hardest thing is when we do things like the data visualizations, because everybody has biases, right? Like I've been working as a nonpartisan my entire career. In fact, I deliberately got out of college and said I don't want to work for politicians. I want to work somewhere near politicians, but I don't want to work for them because I didn't align myself with one party or the other or any particular candidate. So anyway, we spend a lot, but my point is that even that, I still have my biases. I have my political opinions. Everybody does.
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes we get the data and we have to rely on each other in the team. And sometimes, we look outside and ask people what they think, from both sides of the aisle, to ensure that we're not doing something that could be painted as partisan inadvertently, because you can have your I mean, everybody has blinders on at certain points in their lives where they're just like, oh, you're just not seeing past your biases, but we rely on each other for that. We got a great team that really looks at how we're presenting the data, and sure, there are times when we're trying to tell a story because the data is there to tell that story, but we're not trying to influence you one way or the other. For example, we recently, we noticed in the primary, the Democratic primary, that basically a three-way race all night. And one candidate won early votes, one candidate won votes by mail, and another candidate won the election day votes. And
Interesting.
that's it's a clear story, but it's not. We didn't draw any conclusions like, well, it's clear that this candidate was just a better campaigner and brought their people out at this certain time. Uh, It's up to you to make those decisions. My point in that is, we spend a lot of time really discussing, thinking through the wording on our visuals, what it means, how it could be interpreted, and then really concentrating on making sure that we're just presenting the data so that people can make decisions on their own. It's really just about information. On the same note, like with the with the news, that we put out Monday through Friday. I have two people wake up in the morning, they come start compiling, they do the Google searches. It's not something that you can just automatically, it's not a machine thing. It's
Yeah.
really got to be done by humans. And then later on in the morning, just before it goes out, I'm looking at it. And part of that is to ensure that, we're not just presenting one side's argument. We're including as many articles as we can to tell the whole story, and it's a tough to do in this environment because there's the media landscape is so diverse now, and your traditional journalism is less and less and more opinion driven, and we're trying to really focus on really just the news, and then of course you've got pockets of the world that don't trust certain news sources, even though they're credible, respected journalists. So it's something that we're very cognizant of, and we spend a lot of time thinking about. And ultimately, Graham, I'll tell you, we as a nonpartisan, I've always said if I have upset a Democrat and upset a Republican within a 24-hour span, then I'm probably doing my job right.
CEOs, if you're still making big decisions based on outdated dashboard, conflicting numbers, and manual reports, then you're not leading with confidence. You're not alone. Most 5 million plus businesses have this exact struggle, and your tech stack and platforms feel like they're duct taped together. Worse, every week that goes by, you're still flying blind. And if AI is part of your roadmap, well, you can forget about it because clean connected data is step one. So you're still in the starting blocks while others are running ahead of you. That's why we created the free 5-minute data maturity assessment. It's fast, it's free, and it shows you where your business stands and what's holding you back. You'll walk away with a clear score, a snapshot of your current systems, and insight into what it'll take to build a data infrastructure to support your ambition. It's the same approach I've used inside global firms like Capital One, IBM, and Accenture. And now it's adapted for fast-scaling businesses like yours. We've helped executive teams gain clarity, reduce friction, and make better decisions with the data they already have. No giant software overhaul, no disruption to your team, no data science degree required. Also, no magic wand apps that are too good to be true and sell a dream that is effectively only papering over the cracks of structural data issues. This is about giving CEOs real visibility and helping you lead with facts, not friction. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start leading with real data clarity, take our free assessment. It only takes 5 minutes. You'll get immediate insight on your current maturity and just what's possible next. Click below to get started. You've scaled your sales, your operations, your sales team. Now it's time to scale your data. I've led data transformations for some of the world's most complex companies. And now I help CEOs and leadership teams just like yours turn data into a real advantage. Let's get started. Yeah, that's a great KPI, right? For your,
Exactly.
for your own daily dashboard.
Yeah.
And it makes me appreciate the work your team do all the more because, maybe I'm one of those in the pockets, but I basically don't trust any news source. Like I've seen enough things broken as a news item and then play out and the reality and the facts emerge to the point that I find it difficult to trust almost any news outlet, and that's even before knowing how they're funded or how or where their allegiances lie or who owns them and all these other
Yeah.
complications they've got to deal with that you don't have to deal with.
Let me jump in real quick, because I think it goes to the point of data, right? I mean, just because you read one article, that's one data point. It
Yeah.
doesn't tell the whole story. So it's really, I really practice what I preach. I read, conservative outlets and I read liberal outlets and I read what are considered middle of the road outlets, and that's for me to get all the data points so that I can come to a determination on what really is happening. But I promise you, going on social media and reading what's happening there is not a good data point.
It's
So,
it's I mean it's interesting. Like I have this hypothesis that I've heard and attached myself to that. The reason the media is under such pressure because they used to be the providers of information, right? When the only source of information before information was democratized by that invention we talked about called the internet, right?
yeah.
And then the price of distributing and receiving information approximated to zero, right? So then the news outlets, rather than being in an information economy, became an attention economy. And unfortunately, like two of the best ways to get humans' attention are to reinforce biases that they already have, or
hmm
shock and awe, like horrify them. And many of those outlets take that approach. And then, as you say, when you go on Twitter or any other social media, that then gets amplified. So actually, it becomes I almost avoid all political content on social media. It becomes an echo chamber, because I also like to strive to seek other data points and other angles on what I'm looking at, and you just don't get that from social media. It just puts in front of you either what it thinks is going to horrify and outrage you, or what it thinks you already agree with, and it's not a valuable it's not a valuable practice. So all the more important the work that your team is doing, curating the the news in that way for the people of Virginia. But as you say, like, they are curating, right? So inevitably, within short of publishing every single thing that they could possibly publish, which would be untenable, because you've then got a newsletter that nobody wants to read because it's
Yeah.
25 pages, and then it defeats the point of it existing. Decisions have to
Well,
be made about what to include and what not to include, right?
100%. And to touch on what you were just talking about, at the end of the day, people have varying news sources, right? So I think when we look at what is dividing us in this time in a way that we haven't maybe been divided before, is that, it used to be that we could disagree on policy, but everybody was starting from the same set of facts, right?
Yeah.
And so we at VPAP have really focused on, why don't we can put this information out. It's data, and if we put it out there without any partisan spin, then what we have in the end is something that, no matter what what your political affiliation is, you can agree that we're looking at factual information. And then from there, we can have the debate about policy and how to. So, like, let's say the Education Shark Week that I was telling you about. One of those was, we got some data that showed, here's the US average of teacher salaries. And in Virginia, it was less than the US average. I mean, that's a data point. There's, no way around it. These are the same. This is true data.
I mean, I'd be
Um,
interested in the outliers, if there were any states particularly high or particularly low that were pulling the average around, of course. But
yeah,
yeah,
100%. But at least then you start to ask questions. Okay, well, all right. So this is clear here, but, like, what does it mean in the context of everything else? And we give you the link to where we got the data, so you can dig in more if you want to. But the point being is that we're all agreeing that this data shows one thing. Now, uh, let's go find out more information. Do we have a problem in Virginia and we have to raise teacher salaries? Or, to your point, is there something skewing, the data that would make it, or show that Virginia is actually doing a little bit better than what it appears here? Or can you say, you know what? I mean, and this is not my opinion, obviously, but you could say, you know what? The teacher salaries in the US are too high anyway. So
yeah.
we're actually in Virginia in the right spot. But at least we can all agree that we're looking at something, and that now we have to have the debate on what it means and what we should do about it, if anything. And that's kind of the point. That's what we're really focused on, is um, you know, we're paying attention to what's happening in Virginia state and local politics, and trying to better understand, for example, you know, what the data shows, and then let people have the discussion about it. Real quick story. Um, Elections became kind of a prominent thing. They're always a prominent thing, but 2000, we had Bush v. Gore in Florida, and it became a little bit more impactful. Then you had 2016. Um, and there was a lot of questions about, even though Donald Trump won, he didn't win the popular vote. So there was some comments about, well, illegal immigrants were voting. And so I bring all that up because when I started as commissioner, I remember going to General Assembly meetings, and in the committee meetings, there was a lot of passing or talking about bills, because, well, I saw something at a polling place, and so now we need to have this law. And I started thinking, they say that, and it's anecdotal, but where's the data to back it up? So we really started focusing in 2018, when I was there, is to, like, start pulling this data, start trying to understand what's really happening, and, yeah, what are the facts, and utilizing the data to help drive decision making. And so we we started that process, and I think it still continues today. But um, prior to 2016, I don't think election officials, or most election officials, weren't looking at the data to help drive decision making. And I think that it's absolutely critical in the world that we live in now to have the data to make decisions, help us
Yeah,
make decisions.
I mean, other issues I've heard floated around kind of the questioning of election integrity include like the votes coming in by mail or early voting or whatever else. And to me, like those seem like they should be completely data-driven decisions. So in terms of early voting, like what is the uptake on early voting? Like how early is it worth taking the early votes in? If you bring that deadline forward, does it mean that fewer people vote overall? And there's very objective, data-driven ways to make these policy decisions, right?
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny you bring that up because the funny thing is the argument, I think, for expanded early voting in in the early days was that it actually drove up turnout. More people would participate. Uh, and that's not actually true. The data showed. Now, I haven't looked at the data in a long time, but I remember looking at the data way back when, and it did show that it didn't necessarily increase turnout. However, voter satisfaction was higher because they had options and they had. They could vote at their convenience instead of being forced into a certain window. The biggest actual benefit was on the election administration side. So there's some trade-off in the sense that you now have to staff, election polling
Earlier, yeah.
places earlier and for longer. So there's some trade-off, a little bit more expensive, etc. But you could also spread out the election day, so it was a little bit calmer. It was a little bit easier to get through election night. And ultimately, because a lot of the votes were coming in prior to election day, you could actually speed up processing of the counting of the votes. So there's some trade-off, but really what it comes down to is that voter satisfaction, election administrator satisfaction. It makes it easier, more convenient, and people liked that. If you can remember, I can't remember when you came over to the States, but in 2008, I think it was Ohio, people were still in line to vote at like 3 o'clock in the morning
Yeah.
because they got there at 8 o'clock when the polls closed, and there was a line snaking around, and and so really early voting came because of that.
Yeah, it doesn't
The
that
option.
situation just can't help anybody, right? Either
Right.
you and the folks running the election, or the voters, or the candidates, even, right?
Yeah.
Who are then forced to wait for a result.
Yeah. And I mean, there's, like I said, there's trade-offs for everything, but the data showed it wasn't necessarily that more people voted. There was concern that what was considered more of a Democratic base would show up because, they work on Tuesday. It's hard for them to get to the polls,
Mhm.
so maybe they would show up in more numbers as a result of that. And that actually didn't bear out. What it bore out was the people who wanted to vote were still coming to vote, but they could do it more conveniently. And ultimately, it made everybody a little bit more content and happy. Now, you brought up the good question. I think now is the time to really look at the data and determine what's the optimal time. And, in Virginia, we've got 45 days of early voting. In some states, you only have 7 days. There's all sorts of ranges in between there. And I think it's important to start to look at that. I mean, we have 45 days of early voting in Virginia. There was a Democratic primary and not a Republican one at the statewide level. So we had jurisdictions in Virginia where there was like 2 or 3 votes for the Democratic statewide ticket, and they were open for 45 days, and they had to staff and employ people. And so I don't have an opinion on that one way or the other, but that's a data point that we could look at and make determinations based on does this make sense, and et cetera. So
And it's yeah, it ultimately becomes like that's how your tax money is being spent to staff this, and is it worthwhile? And as always, like there's always something to muddy the water of the nirvana that I think you and I both hope for. Of all of that conversation is predicated on an assumption that I think we both share. Of it is the best thing for democracy is if as many people vote as possible. But
100%.
yet,
Yeah.
depending on the party, depending on the state, depending on the district, they may be motivated differently.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's kind of what drives VPAP right now is participation, is a stronger democracy. But you know, it's not just participation, it's informed participation, right?
Absolutely.
It's great for you to show up, but if you don't know what you're voting on, then I can understand the frustration. I can understand in this ecosystem that it's hard. You even just said it. Like, it's hard to trust the media. It's hard to trust the information that you're consuming on a regular basis. So, VPAP has to be one resource, a trusted resource that you can go to make decisions that have aligned with your values. And that's what we're really focused on. And that's the mission of the organization.
So let me paint a different nirvana for us to close on. Say everyone in Virginia regularly consumes VPAP's newsletter, which all of you listening in Virginia should sign up for straight away, and accesses their data in order to ground their beliefs and their political opinions and how they're going to make their choices. How would democracy, either in terms of voting or the conversation that surrounds it, be different if everyone had access and used that information?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that it ultimately comes down to, um, your representatives. I promise you, they want to hear from you to make good decisions. Think about it in your own life, right? If you need to make a tough decision, we can't all be experts in everything, right?
No,
We're not all jacks of all trades, right? So oftentimes when we're having when there's a difficult decision to make, what do? You go and you ask people, what do you think I should do? Here are all the things that I need to consider. An informed electorate, an informed citizenry, can provide information to the public. Um, I think we were talking before, I think prior to recording, about lobbying.
yeah,
I think lobbyists do get a bad rap in some cases. I mean, think about it.
I
You're
know
a
some very nice
legislator.
ones. I know some
Yeah,
very nice ones.
100%, 100%. But think about it. You're a legislator. Let's just say you represent, the city of Richmond in some capacity. Now, we have a citizen legislature here in Virginia, which means that they're in General Assembly session for either 45 days or 60 days a year, where they're passing laws. The rest of the time, they're out, they're got a full-time job. They're among the people living and breathing and enjoying the fruits of their labor, passing laws. The point is that there's not any possible way of all the issues that come up in front of them during the General Assembly session that they would be knowledgeable and have information about all of them. So they rely on lobbyists to provide that information. But you know what they rely on even more, and what way holds more sway for them? Way more sway. A citizen, a constituent. If you go in there and say, "Look, I am one of your voters, and I'm concerned about this issue, and I would love to talk to you about it." And then you can have an honest, open dialogue. And I've seen it. I've seen legislators who bucked their party, that bucked, changed their mind on a position, simply because a constituent came in informed with information and data that helped them say, you know what, you're my constituent. This is important to you. Uh, I'm going to support this. I think that that's really what it comes down to. Now, are you going to win them over every single time? Of course not. But if they don't have the information to begin with, then they can't you can't be confident that they're making the best decision for their constituency. So, an engaged and informed citizenry will help influence their representatives, and an engaged and informed citizenry that realizes that their representative isn't representing them the way they want. Guess what they get to do? They get to vote them out come the next election. That's why I think it's really critical. And anybody can do that. Anybody has access to it, whether you're a college graduate, a professor, or a high school graduate, or even a high school dropout. I mean, the information is there for you to make good informed decisions and to help engage and influence your government. And that's what it's all about.
I love that. It's an amazing call to action, and one that I certainly intend to take to heart and follow even more than I previously was. So for all of you folks out there listening or watching who don't think you've got access to good information, especially in Virginia, and I'm sure equivalent exists in other states as well, Chris, if
No,
folks look for
you're
it.
actually
No?
very lucky. And
Wow.
so I make this joke all the time. VPAP is a unicorn. It only exists in Virginia. There's nothing like it in any other state. For example, Colorado doesn't have one, so you don't have a CPAP. So
Maybe they'd go with a different name.
yeah. Well, the CPAP machine, so they can not snore so much. That's where I go. But anyway, I'm lucky to have inherited this position, and but it is something that is truly unique that doesn't exist anywhere else in the country. So we're excited to be a part of it and have this information so that Virginia, I think Virginia is really a unique and amazing place, and we've got a very informed electorate. We just need to keep expanding them.
Love that. So for folks listening in Virginia, like vpap.org is the place you need to go. Sign up for the newsletter. Avail yourself of all the wonderful data that's there, and empower yourself. Even for those of you outside Virginia, state and local officials, I think Chris and I are very much aligned on that. Engage with them, understand them, find different ways that you can impact and engage in your local community and make a difference. Chris, thanks for such rich and helpful conversation and information and data, both on the podcast as well as through the ongoing work of VPAP, and hugely appreciate the work you do and the work you did previously as the Commissioner of Elections, keeping things fair and correct. So a much underappreciated job, I'm sure. So thanks on behalf of the electorate of Virginia.
I appreciate it.
From me. Thanks so much for coming on. It's been a joy to talk to you, and I'm sure I'll talk to you again very soon.
Yeah, it was great, Graeme. Thank you for having me. Appreciate
Take care.
Thanks
for tuning in to Transformed with Data. If today's conversation gave you even one insight, one aha moment, or one new idea to take action on, do me a favor. Subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone who's ready to level up. Until next time, keep asking the right questions, keep challenging the status quo, and keep transforming with data.